Every serious Amazon brand tracks keywords, ROAS, click-through rate, and the other common metrics, but almost none are tracking performance by location, especially not at the zip code level. That means you have zero visibility into regional and local performance. What if you could know which zip codes are getting over-indexed, which zip codes are high opportunity but being under-indexed, or what zip codes are seeing your ads but producing a low ROI? When you scale without these geographical insights, inefficiency is inevitable, and inefficiency means slower growth for your brand. Your advertising will get more expensive as you serve colder audiences and broader keywords, but it doesn't have to be that way. In this video, I sit down with Ken Sheehan, Geo-Targeting and Geospatial Expert and founder of KnoWhere, a geospatial business analytics company. Ken explains to us how geospatial analysis reveals valuable insights into your Amazon data, and how you can leverage that to make your advertising much more profitable and unlock the next level of growth in your business. That's an overused phrase, but in this case, Ken's insights are backed by top third-party attribution measurement companies. By the way, this is part one of a multi-video series on geo-targeting and geospatial analysis for marketing with Ken. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss those conversations. Cool. So for those of you who knew the channel, my name is Manoli, creative director at Your AMZ. We're a full service management company for Amazon brands to grow on Amazon. Today we have Ken Sheehan with us, is a geospatial and geo-targeting expert who's going to kind of talk to us about what geospatial is. So Ken, if you want to give a little introduction to your background and what you do.
Sure. So in general, I have gone to school for many years to understand what is driving patterns in terms of why things occur where they do. So if you think about it from a marketing perspective, you have a consumer, and that consumer is in a location, whether it's a zip code or their address, Latin long, however you want to look at it. And what we would like to understand, what we would all like to understand is, why is that consumer making that choice, and what does that location and space and time have to do with our ability to predict that that will occur more or less often? And so that's really my background and what I do.
If you want to just tell us about like how long you've been doing this, like how long you've
Oh,
been in the
sure.
industry.
Yeah, so I've actually been doing this for more than 2 decades. And so I started, believe it or not, doing this for rare fish, endangered species. And so if you think about it, right, if you have a very rare organism, and some of our consumers are very rare, right? So if you think about it, you have a rare organism, and that organism, you want to figure out where we can find more to study it, right? So I had to get really good at understanding the drivers of their habitat and why they occurred where they did, and then that helped us locate more of them. And so then, that's where I started more than two decades ago. And then moving on from there, I started utilizing that about 10 years ago for marketing sort of application, right? So we've converted this understanding, ecosystem-based understanding, all these complex drivers in the system. And what we're now doing is looking at that from a perspective of the consumer being that organism that we're studying. Horrible phrase, right? But definitely very apt in many ways. And so we're looking at the drivers that do that. And I've been doing that for about 10 years. I would say that really fully in earnest once we developed the methodology and converted it over for the business ecosystem. We've probably helped out somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 companies, certainly in the 8 and 9 figure in terms of revenue, enterprise level, certainly sub enterprise level, but also a lot smaller. We can talk about that later.
Yeah, and so at a very basic level, right? I know you're at the zip code level of
Mhm.
targeting, and
Sure.
essentially you're looking at consumer behavior at a zip code level to find trends that we can apply to sales data and advertising efficiency. Is that a good way to put it?
It is, and already it's like Pandora's box of things that I could mention related to that, right? So, yes, we are often, especially for national campaigns and for a good look at data, sort of aggregating or having the discussion at the zip code level. But I do want to put out there that often our true understanding is occurring at a much more detailed level, whether it's neighborhood level or even sub neighborhood level, in terms of where these patterns are occurring. And then we can aggregate that to zip code level. And certainly there's a little bit of loss of accuracy when you do that, but the patterns are still very surprisingly robust. And sort of we've navigated that over the years and figured out sort of what's going on there. And yeah, so yes, we're talking about the zip code level for the most part today.
Totally. Cool. Well, let's talk about the problems sellers are facing when it comes to advertising, efficiency, profitability. So you have sellers out there. Some of them maybe have touched on geographical data, right? Maybe their Google ad campaign, they're just targeting the United States. Maybe they've touched at the city level or the state level. I think a lot of sellers, though, probably haven't really started to think about geographical filtering yet. So if you
Yes.
want to just talk about the risks of having blindness to, your geographical data, what are some of the risks when it comes to not having this filter?
Well, I think you raised a couple of important questions, right? I would guess that pretty much all 100% of anyone that would listen to this that is owning a business or selling a product, they have thought, where can I find my customers, right? This is not a unique question. I think back in like 2006, even MySpace coined the term hyper targeting. And that essentially was, let's put ads where people are more likely to be for our particular product, right? Like this is a great concept. It's something that still resonates today, and why you're allowed to geo target within different platforms, right? So the problem is essentially, how do you increase the likelihood and have a better ability to reach your audience? And I will point out a couple of issues right now, right? Privacy compliance. So as your ability to track sort of goes by the wayside in some instances, or it's not as robust as it used to be, even if you have a dossier on as many people as you can have, the reality is that there are patterns that exist geospatially that we're not otherwise addressing effectively to figure out the likelihood of where you should be advertising. And the platforms won't tell that information to you, right? A great example would be sort of, you may be getting an enormous amount of conversions. And let's say Google puts in sort of like all the pushes impressions into a certain zip code, right? We're talking zip code. And it won't tell you that next door to that zip code is actually a match market, which has equal potential, right? It just didn't roll out that way, but they don't tell you that secret, right? And so what we do is we actually independently, we can pull data out of Google. We can append it to your sales data, do all these other different things. It's sort of a complex procedure, but we have the ability now to get around the major problem, which is, one, can we have control over our destiny selling our product, which we often don't have? Two, we have better ability to mitigate risk. And three, we can actually eliminate many areas that may be less productive statistically. And if you have a tight budget, especially, this is really important. So I think I touched on most of what you asked. So if I left anything out, let me know.
Well, what I think is really interesting, something you've taught me, is the idea that like Google Ads or any other of these ad platforms, they might hyper target a specific zip code or a specific group of zip codes, and
Yeah,
you'll
on
have
their own.
on their own. And because you're getting good feedback from that zip code, they might just continue to oversaturate that zip code when you have a match market right next door and you're
Yeah.
getting no exposure. And I think if you just want to talk to the idea of like overexposure, underexposure in a match
Yeah.
market, and then like low ROI areas that are being targeted.
So it's very unlikely that, for instance, someone who is busy running a business or doing whatever it is, they're not likely looking at it like this. They may place their, let's say they're doing DMA targeting or even state targeting or national targeting, which is often very frequently what's done, or city, right? Like people often say, hey, we're selling the best outside of Philly. Or maybe where they're doing the best in LA. And that's kind of where they go to for the most part. But the reality of it is that there are vast inefficiencies even within that sort of size area of a market. And if you start to be able to parse out the detail in that, you can then apply your targeting. You can reinform that system and get a better sort of cohort of people that you're approaching, and increases your likelihood of sales. You would otherwise not know any of that. So relative to impressions, yes, they may put all those impressions into a couple zip codes and they may be doing amazingly well. But wouldn't you like to know that you could potentially lower some of the impressions there because you've got a high saturation, and then increase them elsewhere? You don't change your budget, but all of a sudden you've got a new market that you can then speed up in a way that you otherwise had no ability to do or even knew was there.
Totally. And another interesting thing that we were talking about was the idea that if you're, some sellers might be saying, well, I'm filtering by demographics and audiences,
Sure.
but you sort of taught me the idea that like there are, without a geospatial understanding of a demographic data point such as income, you may be limiting your understanding of that demographic.
It's yes. So number one, I would say we have to remember that any of these platforms that we're advertising on, they are also there to make money. Even though, yes, they are putting information out to you, some information out to you, they're there to make money. So essentially, and we also forget there is a gigantic competition for that space, right? You may think you know your demographics exceptionally well, and you may. Um, However, let's say you now are fighting over getting that information into all of the zip codes in the US, right? And you're competing against all of your other cohort within your industry. Maybe it's a crowded space. Hopefully it's not, but usually it is. And essentially, if you had additional information that you could feed into that system, which we're talking about and the platforms won't tell you, it allows you to sort of I don't know the best way to say it, but you have a better ability to increase your likelihood and make your spend do what you want it to do, which you can't do just from controls within the platforms themselves. So this is kind of a symbiotic relationship, right? Is that we're helping the AI algorithm find a better cohort because there's still a lot of data, even if you may adjust or eliminate certain areas.
And then if you don't mind sharing the idea behind like income is a demographic filter, but if you think about it by location, it can
Sure.
often change the idea behind the return on ad spend.
Oh, right. So I think let's get back to like the fact that it's not just demographics, right? That sort of do this. We have to understand a little bit in sort of space and time. And actually, let me just share a graphic on my screen. It's just from a deck, that we had, but I think this will help illustrate the point as I talk through it. So hopefully, you can sort of see the motion here is we want to understand a couple different things, right? So let's first look at the top left corner. And this is just an image I made for a project actually in environmental sciences a while ago, but it really illustrates the point in terms of let's pretend that that sort of dot is, or at least one of those dots is a consumer, right? And they're out in the landscape, they're in the real world. And so there are so many different factors that come together to create the understanding of how that purchase occurred. And we're often ignoring sort of that three-dimensional aspect to it and the fact that there were, a lot of neighboring values that sort of came to it. You can think of it almost as let's think of it as a raindrop, right? And so, if, for instance, you have a brick and mortar store or you're doing direct to consumer, like with a lot of Amazon stuff, how did they have that decision that allowed them to become a consumer? And so, there's so many things. It may be, for instance, how they drove to work that day and they're late and they're stressed. So then, and they're in a certain industry, they have a certain travel time to work and that influences it. Maybe it's that they live in a really well to do neighborhood, they have high home value, high education. Maybe it's that they have an affinity for cats. Whatever the case is, maybe they have something that they're working on in their lives. We can actually take a lot of that information, and each data layer is a sort of a story, and it creates the book, right? We're storytellers. Everyone sort of says that in our industry, right? But what we're doing is looking at it from a much more three-dimensional ecosystem or business ecosystem wide perspective, and then we're trying to understand why that sale occurred there. So that's that image on the upper left. And then the other aspect of it is that if we look down on the lower part here, this is just basically each line is a state, and within that state we have different cities that are color coded, say all purple or a green, and then what you see is individual zip codes even within those cities. And as you notice this, as you're kind of following along and looking, what you'll end up seeing is that some of the cities and zip codes and regions, they all act together. However, there are others that are doing a completely opposite pattern at the same exact time, right? And so what we have here is different cohorts of different behavior in different regions. And to get at your point of income, right? Let's give the example of income in, say, California or Los Angeles, right? If someone their household is earning, let's say, 150, 200K in California or Los Angeles, and I've said this many times to different people, is that has a certain value. You may actually be struggling if you're living in LA there, depending on your situation, even earning 150 or 200K a year. Not so if you are living in some other rural part of the country, right? So in this case, you may know demographically that income is important for your consumer base, but what you don't know is that that relationship to in income changes dramatically over space and over time across the nation. And the more you understand that, which is not easily gotten at by the case of just knowing your demographics, that you have a high income group that likes to purchase your product, or low, or whatever it is, that would be doing a great disservice in terms of truly understanding and your ability to target your consumer group.
Totally. And I think like if we're imagining a seller who they believe they know internally, our product resonates with a they think high income audience, what they
Mm-hmm.
might uncover by looking at geographical data is that it's really a high disposable income audience. And so you could actually layer in different incomes in different locations. So maybe LA is over $250,000 annual income,
Mm-hmm.
whereas, rural America, it's actually maybe 100 to 150, and you can actually layer in the demographic with the geographical to really find your target customer.
Yeah, and I think what is really interesting for me is that we're getting a little bit at geocausality, right? Like, what does space and time and location have to do with the additive ability to predict the likelihood that something's going to happen? Like, we just recently had a gigantic snowstorm here in the East Coast, and during that time, for instance, I had a client whose product actually, really went down during that time frame because it was influencing a vast quantity of their potential consumers, right? But then there was a nice rebound afterwards. So understanding sort of the ability of certain things independent of demographics to potentially influence your sale is also really important. And we use atypical data sets all the time, things that are not often used in marketing. So an example of one that, and I won't tell you what industry because it's one of the magical things about the model we created for this industry, is, for instance, you can use geological data, meaning superficial geology and soil moisture content actually predicts the occurrence when you combine it with yard size and other things, where this particular industry's client base will be. And then income is also very important to that. But we were able to predict their clusters of historical consumers and where they were selling really well with about 89% accuracy. They utilized that in geo-targeting to ignore the rest of the areas and focus on these areas that were match markets that they had not reached out to yet before. And the end result of that is they had the best year in their history in terms of leads in a single month. And so that to me is the way that we want this to work. We want to look at our data beyond demographics, though including those. We want to create a complex model specific to your sales, right? We'll take your sales data and work with that and incorporate that into the model. It's your golden goose, if ever there was one. Like, never get rid of your data. So yeah, I mean, obviously it's a little more complex than just understanding demographics or not. And I alluded to that a little bit there.
I really like the example you gave about, was it soil moisture, right? Was something that you
Sure.
found, right? If
Yep.
you wouldn't mind just speaking to your expertise specifically, I think some brands might think, well, I already have the zip code data. Why don't I just copy paste that into an AI model and have it spit out, similar zip codes, or
Yeah.
maybe zip codes where we've sold a little bit compared to the ones we've sold a lot. Why don't we just what is it that you bring to the table or that a geospatial expert brings to the table?
It's a great question, right? And what I would say is that, as with many things, there are an enormous amount of pitfalls that you have to know the questions to ask, the data to use, the right statistics to use, and think about just AI in general, right? Like, it's trained on data that's out there. So this is kind of it's like paints, right? Like, you can say, can you paint something? But is it hard to recreate like a Rembrandt or a Picasso? That's not easily done, right? And some may argue that maybe AI is getting there. Who knows if it is or not? But in this particular case, is the ability to generate this type of an output is a very odd mix of thinking outside the box, not using typical data sets, and then looking for patterns within that in a way that's applicable to that particular client. So I guess if you wanted to just like do a very rudimentary, you could do an analysis of what zip codes are you're selling well in. amazing, right? You may discover some good things. These are our best zip codes. That is only the very cursory sort of understanding of that. What you're entirely missing out on is where are you over indexing, under indexing, and which of those zip codes are performing as normal? Where are your match markets that your sales haven't even occurred yet? You may have zero sales in a zip code, but it may be an amazing match market to where you have yet to be, or that you've sold really well in, right? So you may have sold $1 million in one zip code, but what your data won't tell you is that this other zip code in another part of the country or another part of your territory may equally be able to produce that $1 million sales, but you don't know about it and your data won't tell you that. So in this case, what we're really looking at doing is adding that additional layer of understanding, and that can allow you to mitigate risk, and it can allow you to modify and, be more efficient with your budget. And, when we've seen this applied correctly, like with an agency or for instance, in different ways, you can actually change your trajectory. Like perhaps, for instance, like Manoli, you and I are working on a client together right now where the trajectory was downhill. And since we've implemented some of the things that we've been talking about, their growth has actually been about 300% in the course of 6 months in terms of new customer growth numbers, and that's sizable. This is a nationwide company, so I mean, that's a whole nother topic, right? But it's not easily duplicatable without advanced knowledge of geospatial statistics, merging that with marketing, knowing what data to add, what data not to add, knowing how to interpret all of that. And it's not a set playbook that really can be reproduced easily. As a matter of fact, I don't know of anyone that's kind of applying it in the way that we're doing it currently.
Yeah, and I think a lot of brands assume that as their ROAS starts to drop or their efficiency starts to drop, well, we're just kind of hitting the ceiling of market saturation in general, right? For a brand
Mm-hmm.
that isn't doing geospatial, right? And it's
Not
because,
so.
well, broader audiences, broader keywords, and this is just how it goes, right? Our advertising
Yep.
gets less efficient, but as we've talked about in this conversation, there are match markets that have equal efficiency or if not better efficiency that are just essentially invisible to the brands. And so there's actually a lot more efficiency from your ad spend that can be unlocked
Yeah.
at a national level in the United States.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point, right? So quite often I'll be in a meeting and someone will say, as I'm paraphrasing, of course, right? They'll say it's usually the CMO or the CEO, or it may actually be the CFO who says, "Oh, wow, I've been looking for this answer for years." I think the longest it's been is a decade, but understanding your data from this manner allows you to one, explain your decisions, like as a C-suite person, to the board of directors or your investors in a manner that you were not otherwise able to do so. And that's really important in today's day and age. It is also very future proof in the sense that we're privacy compliant. We don't use individual tracking data. We don't need any of that. We are simply doing an outside analysis, appending it to your sales data anonymously, of course. And then we are creating the model from there. So, yeah, I mean, basically, in many instances, we're really uncovering ability to mitigate risk and make better decisions. So not just targeting, but it's often used company wide for just a better understanding of what's going on, or even where to
So
locate a billboard.
yeah. I think it'd be really cool if you want to pull up one of the slides that actually shows a map and shows how there are maybe oversaturated areas and how there's maybe opportunity areas that are just not being targeted. I thought some of those visuals were pretty cool.
So in this case here, and again, like if you work in ArcGIS Pro, this is where we created this image, and even some of the analysis in there is part of that suite of tools. But essentially, the end result of this is what we want to create is an ability to understand one where you've historically performed really well. So like our strong tiers 1, 2, and 3, right? This means that historically you've had great success in some of these regions. And in this particular case, you look all around and in the nation, there are certain patterns that we can already look at, right? Like along the I-95 corridor, not atypical, although I already see patterns visually that are atypical. And for instance, if you look at this particular client in Florida, you notice that even though that's a highly populated state, they're not resonating nearly as well, right? So already we're seeing variation in time and space relative to what may occur and where you're doing well or where there may be potential to do well, right? So the model has certainly picked up on this. And this is just a color coded version of the model at a zip code level in the US. And so looking at it again, right? For instance, you have the opportunities tier 1, 2, and 3. So in this case, those are the match markets to your strong tiers, right? So imagine the question is, oh, I'm selling really well nationally, and you may be happy with that. But then what if someone comes for your board of directors says, what can you do for me now, right? You've kind of plateaued. Yeah, we're doing great, but what else can you do for me? Or maybe you're not doing as well. How can you, right the ship? And this is one way to do that. And I guess here's the kicker, right? We're all tight on budgets. Every single company that I talk to, doesn't matter if it's $1 billion company or selling $10 million a year. The question is, how do I do this without spending more, or can I spend less? The answer is yes, you can do that, but you have to know your region or the US, wherever you're selling, at a much more granular level than typically the understanding is. And so this geospatial analysis allows you to tier things out appropriately. And we go way beyond this. This is just a nice sort of little discussion point. But the opportunity tiers, these are areas that you should be selling just as well as your historically strong tier, green, zip codes, right? And so what we can do is, in terms of a budget perspective, we could actually, without changing the budget, we can shift budget away from some of these white or the green areas where you may be oversaturated or whatever the case is, and we can apply that to the opportunity zip codes in the tiers 1, 2, and 3. And what we see there is quite often the opportunity tiers will catch up, right? All of a sudden you have these fast growing regions because they haven't had as much exposure as they needed to your brand or your product or services. And so that's really what's going on here, right? We understand now the nation at a much better level relative to one another. We know what's driving those sales. We know regionally what the category of data and how to approach each of those regions, right? Like the LA versus the rural America income scenario, right? Like we're varying all that appropriately, and we end up getting something like this. So, for instance, we have the ability to now make much better decisions in terms of our targeting, whether it be on Amazon or other channel. And so, I think this is interesting. I'm curious your thoughts in terms of how you are applying this on Amazon, or would like to.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think this is a great visual kind of summing up a lot of what we've been talking about, right? So you have these strong tiers, which are these dark green areas, and then the match market, which is something we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, we can see here visually depicted in that dark purple. These are areas, like you just said, we're not getting exposure, but has equal opportunity to where we're already performing really well. That
Yeah.
is such a key insight for whether you're an Amazon seller or you're running ads on Facebook or Meta or Google. Huge opportunity. And so, to your point about Amazon, how we're applying this is we are running DSP ads and we're essentially creating audiences at the top of the funnel. And in addition to demographics, we are using your insights and layering in these opportunity tiers. And so we're actually
Mhm.
filling our funnel with much more qualified traffic than just targeting at the keyword level. And so when you're running keyword ads, right, for any Amazon seller watching this video, you know that you're just getting sort of a random click on that keyword, and there's no, it's the geographical filter is random. It's just whatever Amazon gives you at the geographical level. But once you have these insights, you can actually apply that filter, and it's as transformative as going from an auto keyword campaign to keyword level targeting. You're going from auto geographical, campaign essentially to
Mhm.
zip code level targeting, and that's a huge transformation. Just like auto to keyword, we can go from essentially auto to zip code.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm always reminded, like, real estate's an easy way to talk about this, like the real estate industry. And what's the old adage? I think, we've all heard before: location, 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 right? So the same thing applies here in terms of, if you want to identify and find and maximize your potential for a sale, and, all things else being equal, if you were to put, $1,000 of advertising into a zip code where, 1,000 people are interested in, able to afford, and have an affinity for your product, versus, say, you know, um, only 10, but you're going to get the same clicks out of both of those zip codes and your budget ends up being the same. Which would you rather put it in, right? So it's really kind of helping, all the algorithms along. It's helping you understand your results better and your sales better so that you can grow, you just want to grow faster, right? Or at least maintain where you are and not lose market share.
Totally. And Ken, if you wouldn't mind, maybe we can close up this conversation just talking about
Sure.
what does working with you look like? We talked about finding these opportunities, finding these match markets. What is it that you need from the client? What is kind of the work you do, and then what do you actually finally deliver that a client can actionably use for their brand, whether it's an Amazon brand or maybe
Sure.
they're running meta ads? Like, how does working with someone like you, how does it work exactly?
Yeah, well, I would think that that's the easiest part. And so number one, we essentially we'd have a discussion, right? The very easy discovery meeting, and that's where it all starts, right? Is there an alignment between what your goals are and the data that you have? Which, by the way, if you have sales data and you're advertising, you have the data that we need, right? It's that simple. So initially, it's really more of a discussion of understanding where you want to go as a company and what your goals are, what your sort of horrible phrase because everyone uses it, but what are your pain points, right? And so moving on from there, essentially the engagement simply looks like we then analyze your data. We integrate with your team, your data science team, whether you have an internal team placing the ads or you have an agency. We then talk with the agency. We say, here's how we'd like to implement. We generate the model, right? But the model is literally, I can hand over an Excel spreadsheet, which you can then bulk upload, or we can discuss how do you want to target these zip codes that have been identified. We're actually ranking the entire nation's zip codes on a propensity score for your ability to sell a product, right? So think about how easy that would be to implement. And then, for instance, if you want to, in Google, you're like, well, I'm not doing 10 clone campaigns. That's a pain in the butt. Then what we would do is we would aggregate that to county, or we do subsets. It all depends on sort of your ability to implement. But at least you have that understanding, and the implementation is relatively easy. The other big thing I would mention is testing. This is important, right? You want to validate where you're going and the decisions you've made with results that you can report up to the board or whatever. And so we often use third party. So we have a great relationship, for instance, with M Squared, which is Madan Bardwaj, and he has this amazing community. But essentially they run sort of lift and hold out their mixed media or modeling incrementality company. And so with that, we're able to get independently validated results that then can be used to really truly understand how that's applied in different channels. And it's nice that I don't have to say things worked really well and you have an upside of, whether it's 4 or 10% or whatever it is. We're able to validate that with data as well. And you may have that internally, but that's typically how we work. We have, very easy tiers of engagement.
Awesome. Well, Ken, thank you so much for joining. This is a great discussion. I think we should do it again in the future. Where can people watching, where can they find you?
Sure. They can find me at www.weknowwhere, and that's with one W. So I'm sure you'll put it on the post or in the link
Yep.
that you can see that.
I'll link the website in the description below. Thanks, Ken.
Yeah, thanks, Manoli. This has been a fun conversation. Look forward to another.
Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. If you got value from this conversation, please give it a like. And if you're ready to start leveraging geo-targeting and geospatial analysis to take your Amazon business to the next level, just click the link in the description to book a discovery call.